Thank you, Peter. Right, good morning, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Solent Growth Forum. Before we start, can I advise you that the meeting is live streamed and may be recorded? Thank you. Okay, item 1. Lauren, do we have any apologies at all?
No official apologies, potentially late arrivals.
Okay, thanks very much. Do members have a copy of the minutes of the last meeting that we held? Are you happy they're a true record and content with them? Thank you, members. Right, we have items for discussion and decision. Item 2, reflections on the member induction workshops, feedback, etc. Who wants to lead with that? Were people happy with the workshop that we had? Brian, would you like to say anything?
Yes, I was interested to hear others' views, but we thought it was a useful thing to do, to have an opportunity to discuss with you all offline how it works and have a bit more in-depth conversation. So it felt the right thing to do from us, but we'd be really keen to hear if it worked for those who attended, if there's things you'd like us to do more on or less or what. So I'd be really keen to hear what people think.
Members, any comments at all from what Brian has just said?
Well, I'd just like to say that I thought it was really helpful, gave me an oversight of what this is all about, and I look forward to others in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Susan.
Philip, I think you had some good feedback on what you'd like to see sort of going forward. I don't know if you want to share that with the members.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I was going to bring it more up one of the later items, but when it comes to the matters of governance, and we've got an agenda item, it's a mid-year report looking at that today, I'm much more used to seeing the detail work behind it, the work of the internal auditors or the internal teams or external, rather than what seems to be an extracted synopsis of how things look. Of course, what you're saying is accurate, but it's what's not being said. But ultimately, whether we believe it's accurate or not, we really need to see the behind thinking and work that, first of all, how the audit's being approached, what they've then found, and then how they've interpreted. So the headlines are really interesting, but I think as a governance body, we need to actually get right into the data itself before we can make final conclusions on that everything's okay.
Are you happy with that, Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point, and I wonder whether bringing internal audit into one of the future meetings might be useful, or whether we want another workshop sort of solely dedicated to the internal audit work that PCC do on our behalf. I don't know what members think, but I think it's a really good point that you raise.
Can I just pick up on that one? I mean, certainly on our governance group, we have a standing routine whereby both our internal and external auditors present to our committee. In advance of the year, they present us their plans, both those groups, on how they intend to approach the audit, how they've risk assessed it, where they think the areas of priority should be, and we, the committee, agree with that. Sometimes we do tweak it because we have a different perspective. They then come back at a couple of points during the year to update on where they are. They rarely manage, because of all kinds of things, to stick exactly to the schedule. So we might have to direct them slightly to reprioritize something. And then, if they identify things that we're not really comfortable with, then we could ask them to look in further depth in that area. Then at the very end, again, both groups come and present. So I wouldn't see it necessarily as a workshop, although it might be worth doing a workshop so we all have the same level of understanding. I would see them more as routine parts of the business of this group to make sure that we're happy that everything is being done under good governance.
Well, that sounds very good, Philip. I think we can sort of add that to the next meeting as one of the topics, if we can get our auditors to come there. Sorry, Brian, you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, I mean, I think listening to what Philip said, it sounds as if the issue is partially, it's not, as you say, not so much training, that perhaps we're not sharing as much with you as we could. So we have a sub-board, as you may know, the Funding Performance and Finance Management Group, who set and agree an audit schedule for the year and get reports back in from PCC's auditors. And a summary of that goes to the board from that. And so we have got an ongoing programme. We just haven't shared with you all those things. And I'm looking at my colleague, Rich Jones, who knows our governance, as to, I don't think there's any reason why we can't share those audit reports with this group, is there, Rich?
No, there isn't, Brian. We do put the audit reports into the public domain and the forward plan. And interestingly, picking up on Philip's point in relation to sort of the audit plan sticking to what's agreed at the start of the year, that's a similar experience to we find, and FFPMG agreed a slightly revised audit schedule at their last meeting last month, in fact, which reflects the change of the work over this year in response to COVID, which I know we're going to talk about on the agenda today. So it would be a good opportunity, I think, for us to bring an update from audit at the next meeting, and very happy to add that on the forward plan. I think that would be absolutely fine.
Members happy with that?
Good suggestion. Thank you, Philip.
Okay.
I think what Brian said.
I just said good suggestion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
That's good. Okay. We now go on to agenda item 3, the local enterprise partnership response to COVID-19, including the SME funding and support programs. Brian, I gather you're leading on this.
Yes, I just want to make an introductory comment for all of you towards 3 and pointing towards agenda item 4. So my colleague's going to pick up Stu on item 3 and Steve on item 4. But I just wanted to set the context of kind of the why, because I think for this group it's really important we don't just tell you what we've done, but share with you why we did set a course of action. Because I think if you're going to be a useful audit function for us, we need to explain to you the thought process that got us to do a particular thing, and then how we carried it out, and then what we think about it. Because I just feel that then you can understand why we did things. So I sort of want to set the context for this, that in the round of LEP funding, as I think you all know, the LEP funding window pre-COVID and pre the crisis we're in was coming to an end at the end of March 21. So for the last year, we have been mentally counting down and making sure that our budget is as balanced as we can do. I mean, it's by balanced, I mean, we want to spend the money we've been allocated to spend for the good of the region. We obviously can't overspend, because David might get a bit upset if we overspend PCC's funds as our accountable body, but nor do we want to underspend. And when I say balance, that's why I was being careful with it, because it's unrealistic to balance it down to £1 or something like that when you're doing major economic schemes. But in the broad sense, you want to spend the money that the government have given for our region. So we've been counting that down. And of course, when the COVID crisis came, we're about a year away from that. So in the context of a kind of a 5-year funding window, we had relatively small amounts of money that were unallocated. Realizing that we wanted to do something like everyone else about this short-term crisis, though, what we looked at was what funds could we reallocate at that point to the sort of COVID crisis. And in doing that, we wanted to look at a number of things. One was we were conscious that much of our funds are capital, and a lot of the short-term crises were about revenue. So we had to think about how we could free up money for revenue. The second thing was that whilst we wanted to respond to a short-term crisis, we also wanted to keep an eye to the long-term aims of the region. And a lot of people in the region have helped us look at that Solent 2050 plan. So when we were thinking about how to prioritize it, we had that in the back of our mind. But the final thing we were conscious of was that there are 50,000 businesses in our region, and there's a good half of them, if not more, have been in crisis, have been suffering. So it was pretty clear we couldn't fund all of them. And it was also pretty clear that it would be very hard for the board or any subgroup of the board to decide, when we've got 1,000 applications, we agreed to help fund a restaurant in Waterlooville, but not one in Fareham or vice versa. So it was quite hard for us to know how to prioritize things. So we set about making sure that we could free up as many funds as possible. That the next thing was that whatever we did had to be done quickly, And when Stu talks about things like crowdfunder and the ERDF restart funds for tourism, you'll see that we picked routes where there was a governance system in place so that we didn't have a long time trying to set it up, because we needed to do things quickly. And then the final thing was how to prioritize it. And what we tried to do was, and you'll see when we talk about the crowdfunder scheme, was use that as a way to let local communities prioritize the businesses they wanted to survive, because that seemed a good way for us of doing it. So I don't want you to think that as a board we've given up all responsibility for what priorities we think are the region, are right for the region, because that's what we've been elected to do. But in this crisis, we felt it would be impractical for us to do that prioritization against the thousands of businesses we were suffering. So what you see is the result of us saying, okay, we've got to free up as much money as possible. We need as much of it around revenue as possible. We need to do it quickly, and we need to find a way of prioritizing it for the businesses in our area. So what's going to be described by Stu talks about that. And then when Steve's going to talk a bit about some of the analysis that has been done for the region and how we delivered it, and then looking forward to the economic shock and the reports we've had that. Of course, that economic shock report is us thinking that when we move away from the crisis and hopefully move to a recovery mode, we need to have some data for the region, again, to help us prioritize where we put our funds for the next stage in recovery. So I wanted to set that context, because what you're going to hear now is what actually happened, but on the basis of that thought process that came from the board. Before I go on, does that make sense, Graham and everyone?
It does, yes. Members happy? Carry on, Brian.
Good. So I think on that, Stu, is it over to you, or have I missed anything?
No, good. Over to me. Thanks, Brian. Just going to share my screen. And just want to get a thumbs up from Lauren, maybe, or someone, just to confirm that the slides are on the screen. Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, everyone. Thumbs up. Brilliant. Good. Right. Okay. Yeah, just an opportunity to run through some of the work we've been doing in response to COVID, as Brian mentioned, including the economic recovery plan and some of the specific funds and business support offers that we have come forward with. I thought I'd also end with a little bit on UK transition, because obviously the clock is ticking rapidly and it's starting to appear more in the news. And as a gateway economy, it's something that clearly does impact on our economy significantly, depending on which way things go, but also as our trading role through our two key ports, it will have implications for them, of course, as well. So I wanted to finish on that. I thought it was timely to do that as well. Hopefully that's on to the next slide. I had a complication the other day. Has it gone on to a sort of content slide? Yeah, thank you. Brilliant. Good. Okay, everything's. So that's essentially what I'm just going to run through today. So in terms of COVID impacts, hopefully you'll have seen our economic recovery plan, our initial economic recovery plan that we published back in October, last month. And we sort of set out within there our initial responses and actions, which I'll summarize at a very high level in the next few slides. I mean, it is quite clear that COVID is having a significant impact across the UK, but there is evidence, certainly prior to the more localised lockdowns that affected the North and the Midlands, that there was a specific harmful impact on the economies of coastal areas, such as ours. There was an Institute of Fiscal Studies report that identified, I think, Torbay and Isle of Wight as the two local authority areas expected to be most negatively impacted by the economic consequences. Of course, that was pre the sort of second phases of more localized lockdown, but I think there's an important message in there that sort of coastal areas were already challenged in many instances, and we know that all too well locally, with specific sets of challenges, and the sort of nature of their economies broadly around two areas, i.e. they are sort of, very sort of skewed to the visitor economy, which essentially is having three sort of winters with very little in the way of a summer season where they really build revenues to see them through the broader part of the year. And also as a sort of trading area in terms of port activity as well, flows of both people in terms of passengers and of course goods. dried up to an extent as well through that period. So it's not unsurprising that coastal areas, for a whole range of reasons, are likely to be more impacted. And I think, we hear a lot from the government about the levelling up agenda, and I think through our work as an LEP and through your work as local authorities, I think it's really, really important that we don't let that levelling up agenda to become what it always has been in the past, of just a north-south simplistic issue. It's far more complex than that, and I think COVID and the impacts of COVID are highlighting that, and I think it's incumbent upon us all to make sure that we really do sort of make a case for the Solent as having some specific challenges but massive opportunities as well, to support that levelling up agenda. You can see there, and I won't reiterate these, but these are just sort of some of the initial metrics that sort of show the significance of the impact on the Solent economy as forecast. 27,000 jobs expected to be lost. We're starting to see that more and more as we see the redundancy information come through. Unfortunately, I guess, despite the extension of the furlough scheme, we will continue to see more instances of that through the winter months. You can see a sort of 20% impact on the economy as well, 4.5 billion. And when you consider our economy is valued, at least pre-COVID, of 31 billion, that is a sizable impact. So just some sort of headline figures there, which you'll have seen in the economic recovery plan. Now, I know Brian mentioned there the work we've been doing in terms of Solent 2050, which is our strategy for the future. I think there's a view really that while we were in a fairly good place to sort of publish that document, I don't think really now is the time to publish a future-looking document. Not quite yet, because we're so much into the immediacy of restarting and recovering, really. And so our focus really shifted to economic recovery planning, but we haven't ignored that work. It's really important to us, and lots of good work there, because we do need that future vision as we look to recovery, and we will be coming forward with that in the early part of 21. And I think that will need to sort of just be slightly augmented, just to reflect the emerging policies that come out of central government in relation to response to COVID. I think we hear that perhaps Wednesday we might get a 10-point green recovery plan from the Prime Minister as well. That'll be some really interesting stuff in there for our region that will align with our strategy in particular. But I think because there is a danger that we don't sort of have sort of a set of strategic priorities. What we were keen to come forward with through our economic recovery plan is these sort of 6 strategic priorities that I list there, and these really are drawn from the work we did on Solent 2050 and informed by the extensive engagement we did, where we spoke to over 1,700 people and over 500 businesses to inform these. So I won't labour these. I mean, the first one, you won't be surprised. The Solent, in terms of its sector strength and its sort of comparative and competitive advantages, very much around the marine and maritime economy. So we want to maintain that advantage that we have and continue our world leading our world leadership in that arena. Something that really has come up the agenda, predating COVID, but it's been interesting to see that the government are focusing a lot of their efforts on green recovery. But this is something that really stakeholders were very passionate about prior to COVID, when we were doing our strategy work, and that's around pioneering approaches to climate change and pioneering approaches to climate change adaptation and decarbonisation. Clearly massive topical issues. If we do think back to pre-COVID-19, there was, the sort of Attenborough effect, the Greta Thunberg effect as well, where this was really strongly in people's consciousness. And it's certainly very much shaping the work that we're doing as an LEP today and our investments as well. And I've just actually come off a call with colleagues in the New Forest around sort of natural capital study that we're doing for that area. And we had a call on Friday with Environment Agency about, around nature-based solutions. This really is starting to shape a lot of the work we do. And if we reflect on how COVID has changed all our lives in terms of, businesses moving, there's evidence that businesses are moving out of London and moving to sort of more coastal and rural areas for the quality of life they offer, the well-being benefits of good quality environment as well. I think this is, one of the areas where there is a massive opportunity for the Solent to sort of harness that outstanding natural and maritime environment it has for economic benefit. coastal renaissance. This is really our sort of levelling up strategic priority, really. And it's saying that we've got some really challenged coastal communities, but they've got massive opportunities as well, if harnessed in the right way. And this this includes sort of revitalisation of our town centres that have. Town and city centres that were, under extraordinary pressures prior to COVID, and obviously with the pandemic as well, that's probably accelerated some of those challenges as well. But they are and always will be, centres for commerce and social interaction. So it's about how they reinvent themselves for the future, so that they can continue to be those sort of bustling places of economic activity. Another area that perhaps we haven't given due regard to, in fact, we haven't given due regard to in the past, is around our visitor and cultural and creative economy, I guess we could add in there as well. And that's really come up the agenda strongly, and I think highlighted by COVID as well in terms of the visitor economy and the response we need to kickstart that area and actually broaden the shoulders of the season as well, so that it becomes a more all year round offer and capturing more sort of domestic travel as well. Talent base, and in terms of the skills, our people, a real challenging environment for young people, particularly leaving school or education, moving into the workplace. It's going to be a saturated labour market, perhaps with less jobs as well. So, and perhaps less opportunities to get work experience because of social restriction measures. So, really important that we do make sure we think about new ways of supporting young people in particular, but also retraining of people who are perhaps made redundant and perhaps need to find new skills, new digital skills to enable them to have careers in a different area to perhaps what they have previously been in. And of course, we want to make the area an outstanding business environment as well. And again, people's working patterns are changing. Is there as much need for office space? So we need to sort of understand that a little bit more. So these are the sort of six strategic priorities, and sorry for labouring those, but they do sort of set a context of the work that we do. And I think the reason why we have paused on Solent 2015 coming out is because some of those, as I've just been listing them, there are things we need to consider in relation to those in light of sort of the changing habits, changing ways we've responded to COVID. So just moving on to the sort of economic recovery plan. So we highlight those 6 strategic priorities within the economic recovery plan. So that provides people with an opportunity to understand where we're heading. And we sort of look at this 3-stage approach in the economic recovery plan of survival, stability and growth. And there's a kind of continuum along the bottom there as 6 to 24 months. But I think it's more helpful to think of these in light of what we now know of these as being slightly more dynamic than sort of in particular time phases, because we're in survival and perhaps we're moving to stability, but actually with the onset of the second lockdown, which may well be extended, who knows, some businesses will be back into survival mode as well, and who's to say that won't happen again in the early part of 2021. So I think this isn't as simplistic, and that's part of our learning as we've moved forward from the initial development phase of this strategy to actually understand how COVID is manifesting there, really. So I think that is more of a dynamic than a sort of a simple linear continuum there, I would say. So turning on to sort of specific things in terms of our economic recovery plan, as I say, it's sort of it's organised under those 6 strategic priorities. And I won't list these verbatim because I'm probably droning on too much as it is. But under the marine and maritime element, it's really important that our investments are sort of focused around these 6 strategic priorities. And through the Getting Building Fund, which I'll come on to in a bit, we have been able to invest in the fifth cruise terminal at Port of Southampton. We would have loved to invest in the extension to the passenger terminal at Port of Portsmouth as well. We just didn't get enough money, but that's very much in our future thinking as well. Freeport status. The invitation to bid for Freeport status was published by government yesterday. I'm looking down there because it's here next to me, and I'm currently reading through that. We have a task and finish group that's been established since October last year, to think about opportunities there. It's something we're very interested in, and partners have asked the LEP to sort of provide the sort of lead role in coordinating activity amongst the private and public and academic and research sectors to come forward with a really strong bid. We've got to get bids in by the 5th of February, so not a long time at all. And government are looking to provide about 10, up to 10 free ports across the country. I think it's pretty fair that 3 of those will be in the devolved nations as well, which brings it down to around 7 in England at best. Pioneering approaches to climate change, adaptation, decarbonisation. I mean, as I say, we have been investing in this arena. I think we've got an ambition sort of around a decarbonisation nature-based solutions hub, obviously conscious of the work that PFSH are doing in terms of a green print as well. So need to work alongside that. We don't want to duplicate anything that's going on. But there are quite a lot of activity in this arena happening by lots of different agencies and actors, and it's about how we coordinate that so that we all have a sort of collective approach. But I think what is clear is that Solent does innovate and does some exceptional work in this regard, and it's about actually showcasing that, doing new work, and actually seeing if there are benefits to the wider UK in terms of rolling that out to other areas based on the experiences here. UK Capital Coastal Renaissance, I've mentioned high streets there as well, but I think physical and digital connectivity become really important features, that digital connectivity in particular as well, and we're in the process of one of the Getting Building Fund projects of investing in digital infrastructure along Forley waterside as well. So
Stuart, can you just ask a question about the infrastructure for developments? Is any of that for Wellbourne going for Junction 10 on the M27?
So we have funded the business case, the development of a full business case for Junction 10. So we're the only people that put funding into that. We've put £4.65 million of our funding in to develop that business case to date. We've recently agreed to provide Hampshire County Council, who are the scheme promoter for that project, with a further £900,000 to enhance the design elements of that project as well. There's a lot of work still to do in terms of that project, in terms of identifying the funding for the project, which is obviously critical. It's come a massive way since we initially put this in our local growth programme back in probably 14-15, but still quite a bit of work to do. But that is a key piece of enabling infrastructure. One of the challenges for us is that our funding times out in March 2021, so all our money needs to be spent by that date for the local growth fund. So whilst we'd allocated funding for that project, which wouldn't have covered it, there was still a sizable gap to be filled. It would have timed out, so the board had to redirect that money to other projects. But the board is still adamant that this is an absolutely key priority project for the area. 6,000 houses, huge, and about 1 million square feet of business space, of commercial space as well. So the board have sort of said, look, we're still willing to continue to invest to make sure we progress the design of that project, so that those discussions with government on securing the funding package can be enhanced. Can be taken forward. Okay, Brill. So visitor economy as well. I mean, an ambition we've got here really is to secure a Solent tourism zone, and we're going to come forward next year with a visitor economy strategy. And as I said, one of the features there needs to be around how we sort of optimize sort of the staycation element that perhaps may come forward in a response to COVID, how we broaden the shoulders of the summer peak, and also how we do more to capture the cruise traffic that's coming through both our ports. And we can't forget Portsmouth there, which has got a growing and distinct cruise offer that largely is also more beneficial for the local tourism sector as well, in terms of visits to the city and the surrounding area as well. Talent base. One thing that's worth mentioning here in terms of skills and our talent base is Institute for Technology. The Wave 2 opportunity has come has been published. So we're working with Solent University, University of Portsmouth and others to develop an Institute of Technology proposal that's focused around higher level vocational skills for maritime advanced manufacturing and technology. So we're in the sort of throes of doing that at the moment, but the lead for that is Solent University. But we've been quite successful in getting employers involved in that, because employers have to be front and centre of that, designing the curriculum and sort of involved in the governance of that as well. So fingers crossed on that one. And then in terms of an outstanding business environment, I'll talk more about the kind of specific projects we've and funding offers that we have come forward with in response to COVID in a mo. But yeah, we'll certainly continue to do that. And as I say, UK transition is very much in our mind, and we're starting to see more funding come forward from government to support LEPs and others to support businesses on that. Getting building fund, I think I've mentioned that a few times in the slide deck already. This was the sort of most recent capital funding opportunity that was provided to LEPs and mayoral combined authorities. And it was a £900 million fund, came forward in around sort of April to June time. I think we did an open call for projects, got lots, and I think we had about, yeah, there we go, the details are on there. We had 65 applications totaling £1 billion of projects, and seeking about £340 million of grant support from ourselves. Clearly it was a competitive fund, and they say it was competitive, but actually they kind of allocated funding on a formulaic basis, which included population, but also included the extent to which COVID was expected to impact on local economies as well. So for instance, because it's expected that COVID will have a more detrimental impact on the Solent economy than the Enterprise M3 economy, then we secured more money than Enterprise M3, despite them having a slightly larger population as well. So we secured about £15.9 million, which, bit disappointed with, really, but that £900 million has to go around across the 38 LEPs. So it's one of those things, and we were able to invest in 6 projects as a consequence of that. And the ones that we're working with to take forward are listed on the screen there. So we've got the 5th cruise terminal at Port of Southampton, an £8 million investment, and the £1 million investment in the Centre for Enzyme Innovation. Those two have gone to contract already. So the 5th cruise terminal is got steels coming out of the ground. I think the roof's going on very shortly as well. So we're really pleased with that, because this money has to be spent by March 2022, and it's all about getting the economy firing again as well. Centre for Enzyme Innovation is around using enzymes to break down plastics, so really important on the environmental side. If we think about the sort of the impacts of plastics on the environment and in the oceans. I mentioned the Forley Digital one, so £750,000 to essentially light up the water side, really, in terms of superfast. I think there's about 20,000 properties that could potentially be connected to that. So it also improves resilience as well, because it provides an alternative connection to what exists already. Branstone Rural Employment Hub. So this is a rural site on the Isle of Wight that will have a sort of year-round visitor attraction. We'll have a brewery, we'll have employment space, and we'll have affordable housing as well involved in it. Silicon Wharf Control Centre in Southampton. This is at Woolston. Interesting one, really. It's on the former Vosper Thornycross shipbuilding site, but actually very much cutting edge maritime there, with a control centre for a fleet of autonomous vessels as well. And then nutrient mitigation, working with Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust and Partnership for South Hampshire to purchase agricultural land and to rewild it, and then that can be sold to developers at developer credits to enable them to sort of unblock the planning system and to sort of mitigate against nitrates going into the Solent. Headline outputs are there. So in terms of the 15.9 million, potentially leveraging in just under 60 million, creating 700 jobs, 1,500 housing units, mainly from the nutrient mitigation, to be honest there. And you can see some significant savings in terms of CO2 emissions avoidance as well. So moving on to sort of business support offers, and yes, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Graham and everyone, just in the context of what I said at the beginning, when the crisis started, we didn't know we were getting this 15.9 million. So COVID unfolded, we started to reallocate funds. Then the government said we're doing this Getting Building Fund, and we had to apply on top of it. So this money was on top of what we thought we'd have at the beginning of the year when we set off doing it. And it had a set of specific constraints around it about when it had to be spent and what it had to be spent on. So it was an adjunct that we didn't expect when we started out. I just wanted to set in the context of my introductory comments. Sorry, Steve, carry on.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. And as I say, there were quite a lot of constraints from government. They had to be exceptional schemes. And as I say, one of the key things was around their ability to start ASAP, really. And government were quite clear on that. So, so sorry, just moving on then. So in terms of the funds, and I think it's worth saying as well, back in March when lockdown happened, I mean, what we took the sort of decision as an LEP to sort of transform our operations. We merged two directorates within the LEP, recognizing that we really needed to pivot to business support. With schools closing down, for example, we were able to draw on the expertise of some of our careers advisors who engage with businesses, had really good and strong transferable skills, to put them on the front line in terms of supporting businesses as well. And that worked really well, and they did an exceptional job then. So we really did sort of pivot that resource we had, recognizing we're a small team, where it was needed. And I'm sure Rich on the phone will be able to give you the sort of numbers in terms of increased hits on the website and calls. But yeah, it was significant volumes compared to where we had been pre-COVID, as you'd expect as well. So in terms of some of the business support offers, I mean, we've been really busy in this arena, and recognise that it's been a really important role, particularly for our growth hub, to sort of step up and fill in some of those gaps that perhaps weren't filled by what was quite an extensive central government package of investment and business support offers, but actually also look at those opportunities locally where there perhaps was a need for the LEP through its funds to step in. So we developed at a very early stage a dedicated coronavirus support hub. We'll share these slides around, of course, as well, because there are sort of hyperlinks on there to these funds and opportunities. So that was a sort of hub where you could just, a business, instead of sort of navigating through our website, they could just go straight to that and see the range of supports that were available for them. And then we sort of list here really a range of grants. And I think Brian mentioned the European Regional Development Fund, ERDF, SME fund there, which is the second one. This round 2 is currently open, actually, and closes next Monday at 11:59. So a really good opportunity for small, medium-sized enterprises to come forward and secure funding for them to adapt and diversify in response to the impacts of COVID. And secure grants of between £1,000 and £3,000, and then exceptional circumstances between £3,000 and £5,000, where they feel that their business has been sort of disproportionately impacted by COVID, which may well be the case in some instances. The purpose of the funding is grant funding to cover 100% of the project costs. Is for businesses to secure sort of one-to-one specialist advice, so professional services. It could be HR, could be legal support, maybe advice from IT houses to support them moving online or to diversifying their website offer. What we did see, and this was replicated across all of these funds across England, was that actually the focus was really sorry, I've got a Word doc on screen, which is the notes I was reading. Thanks for someone telling me that. That's fine. I'll move that away. Was really around people were sort of looking for funding for things like laptops and sort of IT equipment, which is absolutely fine. There's no problem with that, because there has been a need to sort of move to home working and to move online as well. But that's something we certainly saw through round 1 of the fund. In terms of the COVID Restart Restore Loan Fund, this is now closed actually, but it's worth just dwelling on, because obviously government came forward with C bills and B bills loan offers, but we did see in the local offer that there were businesses that were unable to secure those loans, or unable to secure sufficient amount of loan funding through those opportunities. So there was a small need for a sort of local offer, and we only received about 9 applications through that fund. But we have got 2 projects, both in the sort of visitor stroke hospitality sector coming forward on the island and in the New Forest. And there's 2 other projects also going through the system now as well. So this was where businesses could secure sort of up to 1.5 million pounds of loan funding at essentially interest free, or a very, very low interest rate, to support them through the difficulties. And it's perhaps no surprise that it's been that visitor economy who really just haven't had the cash flow to continue activities through that period. Next one, a pay it forward. So this is crowdfunder, which Brian mentioned as well. Pay it forward. This has been this was really successful in the sort of first lockdown. Did very much taper off as the economy started to reopen, but we've given it a new push and sort of reinvigorated it, I suppose, last week again, and hopefully we'll see some new applications coming forward. But essentially for smaller businesses who've got fewer than 50 staff, there's an opportunity to secure up to £5,000 of LEP investment, and then for smaller sort of micro businesses that have up to 10 staff, they can secure up to 2,000. So essentially, a business can put itself on crowdfund and say, this is my project, this is my campaign. They'll get support from crowdfunder to help them do that. They can get donations from supporters of their business, set themselves a target, and once they reach that target, we will come in with our investment as well. Through that fund, I mean, today it may well have changed, but we've been able to we've received 126 applications, and 84 have been approved, which has meant that we've been able to invest around just under £190,000 into businesses as well. A couple of further sort of rural business resilience funds, Isle of Wight and New Forest, are sort of key rural areas. Specific rural funds providing capital investment of between £2,500 and £50,000 to businesses looking to create new jobs in those areas. Again, successful funds, and we're working through a third party called Natural Enterprise, and we're working with them to perhaps reinvigorate those funds again and secure new and put more investment into those funds on the back of the success that we've had with those today. Beyond the specific funds, we've also, we've got a COVID-19 business support tool where businesses can go through a sort of set of questions to help them with diagnostics about where they may need to get support or may benefit from support. We've included a whole range of YouTube videos. There's been support to third parties who are providing sort of webinars and other roundtables as well. We've had mentoring programs, and then more recently, or in fact now, we've received funding to support a peer-to-peer program where we're looking to bring forward some facilitators for around 10 cohorts of around 10 to 12 people, and this will be sort of business owners, business leaders coming together to sort of talk about the challenges, facilitated by that facilitator as well, and hopefully that will give them sort of lasting benefits in terms of some really strong peer networks. And I think experience from other countries is showing that quite intensive peer-to-peer support is generally very, very successful, and arguably more successful than grant funding programs as well. So we're very interested in that. That is working to sort of national criteria. So what we're doing locally, where there's been some applicants who have come forward and said, I'd really like to take advantage of this, but they don't quite fit the criteria, we're looking to put our own funding in to broaden that program as well, so that we can try and get as many people on it as possible. I don't know if it's worth just stopping there at all for any questions on any of that, or Brian, if you wanted to say anything before I just finally move on to UK transition, which is just one slide.
No, I think it's back to Graham to see if there's any questions.
Has anybody got any questions for Stuart?
Yes, please, Chair. I do, if I may. it's a really interesting presentation, and there's lots going on. If you go back to the Getting Building Better Fund,
Yep.
you introduced it by pointing out why our waterfront economy is going to be particularly badly affected.
Mm-hmm.
But then you announced that we got something like 2/3 of what a simple pro rata allocation might have been. And you said you were disappointed that we got 15.9 or 15.8 million out of what had come into us was something like 340 million potential things. Is there any reason you've been able to ascertain why our bidding wasn't so successful? And most importantly, are there any lessons that can be learned from that? So next time such a shovel-ready request for bids comes up, we're well placed to optimise what we may get.
Yeah, no, thank you. And apologies if I confused anyone with that. So the overall value of the fund at the national level was £900 million. So that's what was available in the fund. Our population is 1.3 million. So I think we did slightly better than what we would have got if it was done on a per capita basis because of that formula they added in to reflect the impacts of COVID. So my disappointment is just a personal disappointment because I always want us to get more money, and I'm always disappointed whatever government give us. And I think I'm always disappointed because there was 11 really strong projects that we put forward, and we were only able to fund 6 of those. And I'm always in favour of these kind of funds being truly competitive, and we rarely see that. Government will say that they're competitive, and I think the bids we actually put in are very strong and would compare really, really well. And our delivery track record, I would argue, is probably stronger than pretty much any other LEP anyway. So I think that's a real key determining factor on where investment should go from government in the future. Who can you trust to invest the money? So it's more of a personal disappointment, I would say, although I'm sure Brian's disappointed as well. I'm sure we all are. We all want more money because we would have funded it. And in fact, one of the projects that we were unable to fund was Gigabit Gospel in your patch as well. Yeah, exactly. And we would have liked to have funded that. And we're very keen to keep that warm through because, as I say, there is a budget coming up on the 25th. It's not impossible. There might be a further round of Getting Building Fund. And I know me and Steve spent about 5 hours Friday night trying to fill in the fund, which I think is government seeing where areas are in terms of their contracting and delivery. And we were able to say we've got 2 projects contracted. And it was interesting that none of the drop-down boxes on the monitoring form allowed you to say that you were actually in delivery and contracting, because I don't think they're expecting areas to be at that stage already, but we already are, which is good. So there's always lessons to be learned, absolutely, and we learn those all the time. And what I would say, actually, and again, be interesting to get reflections, is what I do think other areas do well, and we've done less well historically, is almost mobilising as an area and almost sort of saying, look, we're all behind this bid, and any contacts we've got, whether it be through our MPs or through anything else, and sort of saying, actually, look, this is a really strong set of proposals, and because I think certainly areas in the north do that a lot better than us, and we do have challenges down here, and they can be sort of painted over by we're in the southeast, there's no problems down here, and we all know there is.
That's helpful.
Always lessons to be learned.
Stuart.
Absolutely.
Chair, may I ask a question as well, please?
By all means, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. One question, probably one gentle sort of slight statement more than a question, maybe. Firstly, in terms of the grant setup, what sort of partnerships, and I've seen some business bodies promoting the grants on behalf of the LEP, which is great. But I think the most powerful thing is how strong is our partnership model with businesses in the support, in the business to business world of supporting other companies and other partners to drive out the message that we've actually got some money to help people, because that is the biggest challenge, isn't it? People knowing the money is there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So one thing I didn't mention, and I really should have done, actually, it was a bit of an omission. Right back in probably March or very early April, we brought together all of the local authorities, all of the business representative organisations into what we call the Solent Coronavirus Business Support Task Force. It's chaired by SJ, our what's now deputy chair of the LEP, and that has brought. I mean, that was initially in response to the sort of business support grants that local authorities were getting, because we wanted to sort of, you know, enable a forum where people could sort of say, look, this is what we're doing, and yet over the border we're doing this. So just to kind, you know, bring everybody together, we were able to also through that process talk about the grants. We were offering, actually get intelligence from all those business representative organisations about the conversations they were having and the challenges for their businesses, make sure we weren't duplicating anything they were doing, and so that we could all co-promote what we were doing as well. So, you know, you'll see on our website that we do promote things that the Chamber are doing. We're involved in Chamber of Solutions in terms of UK transition, and that has proved a really good forum. We're now meeting on a monthly basis, although we had a sort of extraordinary meeting last week, actually, you know, in response to sort of lockdown 2 being announced. But that has provided us with a really good forum of bringing all those bodies together. And I think, actually, what I would reflect, if I'm honest, actually we work with them a lot better now than we did pre-COVID, which I think is another positive from it as well. Always more work to do though, but that has proved a really useful forum for us and them, I think.
Thank you. And I think the one area that I've noticed are pretty active are the small accountants who are, you know, really reactive at promoting to their client base. You can get these grants, and they've been, you know, I've been following a fair few of them just because of my own sort of business stuff, and they're all going, oh, can you get, you know, you can get this money, you can get this money. So there's sort of part of me going, oh, this is, we've got, because we need a ton of ambassadors, don't we? We need people on the ground talking about what we're talking about all day long for us to get the message.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of that ERDF grant, I mean, that is, you know, say most people have bought laptops and things, which is fine. But actually the principle of the fund was around professional services advice. And this is money for them to say, look, to our clients, look, we can offer you this service. It will help you respond to COVID, and you can get it paid for free. Just fill in this application form. So I'd definitely encourage them to sort of, you know, get onto their sort of business, you know, their client base and say, look, are you aware of this fund? This is how we think we can help you. You know, be aggressive about it. It's a commercial opportunity, I get that, but it will still help the businesses, which is the end goal, you know, the end goal we all want.
Stuart, just one thing, you say be aggressive. Well, the leaders of all the authorities deal with the LEP. I mean, surely when you're looking for bids, looking for money, want an endorsement, surely the leaders of the various local authorities will try and bang the heads of the MPs and get them to all agree. Brilliant. And come up with a consensus. I mean, if that's what's needed, that's what's got to be told to the leaders of the authorities, in my opinion.
Graham, yeah, I go along to that, and we have on a number of occasions got people, you know, written combined letters to do things. I was reflecting on the question that you and Philip asked really there about funding. One of the frustrating things we constantly find, and I hesitate to say this in front of all you proper elected politicians, is that there's no question that the government prioritises mayoral combined authorities in their funding formula. And we are not one. One of the things we've been doing is we've been working with the other Southeast LEPs, recognising that it's quite hard to draw up an economic region that is the Southeast, because we've all got so many different priorities and challenges. But we have been trying to get together to get government ministers to take account of us as a region. Otherwise, their tendency is to go and talk to Northern Powerhouse 10 or the Southwestern Gateway. So we've been trying to define ourselves as a region, because certainly with the government looking for recovery, they're not just trying to do levelling up, they're trying to do the multiplier effect, as in, if I spend £1, where does it have the biggest impact on the country? And there's little doubt that as a gateway region, we have a better multiplying effect than almost anywhere else. And that message has played quite well. But like you all, I mean, I'm frustrated because when we had our mid-year review, which we'll come on to in agenda item 5 or 6, whichever it is, we were complimented by the MHCLG staff about our application for the Getting Building Fund. You know, it's one of the best applications they had from anywhere. It was on time, it was coherent and all those things. But what I want to say to them is, and supposing we'd done a bad one, would that have made any difference? I mean, that's the kind of slight frustration you get when you're talking to them. That I took it, I'm sure that the individuals we're talking to are being honest, that we made their lives much easier by having a coherent fund and a coherent application. But if I was to say what evidence is there, that made any difference other than just meaning that the people we work with had an easier life, it's a bit harder to be specific about. So I share some of your irritation on that issue, because I also think this mayoral combined authority thing, it suits some areas more than others, and it seems wrong that our businesses and our economy should be penalised because we're not one of those. But I better hand back to you politicians quickly now before I get myself in.
Oh, when you dig a hole, you dig a hole. Don't worry.
If I may just make a sort of small statement, stroke question, Chair, on thank you for that, Brian. Anyway, we're very open-minded as politicians to lots of different opinions, and we take it on the chin. So that's very helpful. But you're right. You know, we need to be in government as one voice, saying if you want to get X amount of money on your £1 you're going to spend, this is where you need to do it, and these are the reasons why, and these people are going to make it happen. And then we need to do that with the private sector, obviously, as well. The peer-to-peer support, Stuart, I think you know, is proven that it is so much more beneficial just because it's people, isn't it? And it's not just, there's more money than there is people in the world. What we need actually is the right people with the right money in order to help us do what we need, not just the right money. And I think that's something that we are very keen on in Southampton as the opposition and as the city, really, to see how that can be rolled out, because it's not it's time, you know, it's not massively expensive, but it can be hugely productive. And I suppose the other thing that I think we probably want to be conscious of, and I think you've talked about in the longer term, you know, 2050 vision, is that COVID is just the start of a period of transition that's coming. All it's done is accelerated what we already knew was coming, but rather than it being over 10 years, it's now been over 9 months. And so those changes are going to be quite rapid on the job market and the social climate that we live in. And I think part of our challenge is to say to people, look, there's going to be a whole load of stuff there. The state is here to help you, which we are, but actually in the middle, there's a whole ton of opportunity to transition and create something new. Apart from the fact we don't know what some of that looks like, but that's not new. 10 years ago, we didn't know what half the things we have now look like. So I think we've got a real almost positive message to be able to sell to people of, look, this is going to be a journey, but actually we're well placed to do it. We've done it historically in the last 10 years, 20 years, if you like. This is how your LEP can help you, and this is how we can help people move through that journey. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Daniel. Stuart.
Brilliant. Okay, no, thanks everybody for that input. Really helpful. Thank you. I've literally just got one more slide then, because I think I'm up with time as well. So hopefully that is now showing on the screen. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention UK transition as well. I've talked about free ports, and we see them as supporting that. Not absolutely focused on the UK transition piece. It's more about a future trading relationship with the world, and sort of tax benefits there as well. But excuse me. But I've mentioned that. I think what is worth mentioning, and it won't be news to lots of people, is that I think, you know, Dover and that Dover Strait and that connection will come under quite a lot of pressure with increased paperwork. And I think there is a geographical advantage of particularly Portsmouth and its cross-channel traffic that can provide a significant resilience role for UK PLC. So that may be something that we'll see increased sort of freight traffic coming through Portsmouth, given its I think it has more destinations on the continent than any other UK port as well. So an opportunity there. And I know speaking to the port director, they're starting to see new contracts as well, and people sort of seeing reliability over speed as a driver, which is interesting as well. In terms of some specifics, in terms of UK transition, Department for International Trade are sort of on the lookout for export champions, and have asked us to come forward with nominations. So this will be sort of manufacturers who are operating in the area, who do a lot of exporting and perhaps able to help others sort of navigate the exporting market and sort of perhaps diversify their offers as well. So if there are, sorry, someone's telling me no slides are showing there as well. It doesn't matter. I'll talk through these. So if there are any export champions out there that you think are sort of good, manufacturers that do export, then please do get in contact and let us know, and we will feed those through. In terms of, we've got a UK transitions toolkit as well, where businesses can go through for, it's almost diagnostic as well, to identify challenges and opportunities for themselves and things they might need to find out more about. Master classes, signposting, signposting to master classes that others are delivering, but also ones that we will deliver as well. We're offering, one-to-one support, just talked about peer-to-peer support, but other one-to-one support in terms of UK transition and specific help that may be available, and things that businesses don't know, but really may well need to know. And as I say, working with other bodies as well, such as the Hampshire Chamber in some of the projects they're doing. But there's a lot of work to do. We've recently secured some, government have given OLEP some funding to bring in extra capacity. So we're looking at working with a particular consultancy to get them on board very, very soon. They've got great pedigree in terms of international trade and events. So we'll have a new programme of activity that we're able to come forward with very shortly. But we're very much sort of sprinting in this arena at the moment, because I think a lot of the focus really had been on COVID, and we're starting to see now, certainly over the last few weeks, an increasing focus on UK transition as well. So that's probably everything for me. I'm not sure you can see those slides. Just heard someone say they could, and someone said they couldn't. So that's all from me, though, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Members, any questions for Stuart at all? Okay. Well, thank you for that, and welcome, Alexis. Nice to see you there. We move on to item 4, the update on the Local Growth Fund impact analysis conducted by Aecom.
Stephanie's been able to join us, which is great, Chair. Very quickly, I'll just give an overview of where we're at with this work before Stephanie gets into the detail. So at the previous meeting back in June, forum members received a presentation from Aecom, which looked at the early impact of a selection of our most advanced local growth deal investments on the Solent economy. This work is in the process of being finalised, and you'll hear more about that toward the end of this agenda item. At the same time, the LEP also commissioned Aecom to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the same selection of local growth deal projects, some of which are still under construction and some of which are now in the outputs delivery phase. The impact of COVID-19 on the local growth deal was critical for the LEP to consider, not just in terms of the fast approaching spend deadline of the 31st of March 2021, but also the impact on the projects which are delivering outputs and outcomes, and will continue to do so for some years to come. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Stephanie Cesbron, Associate Director of Economic Development at Aecom, who will be delivering today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, I'll jump right in then. So Steve said I will start with an overview of the work we did assessing the impact of COVID-19 on 18 local growth funded projects. So the analysis was undertaken mostly in sort of June 2020. So it's just important to bear that in mind, because of course at the time the various projects had experienced about 2 or 3 months of lockdown, and we're really just trying to adapt to that situation. It was all quite new. The list of projects is under there. It's a mix of training and education center, transport infrastructure, development, research and innovation. Is the same projects as we covered in the impact assessment that Steve also mentioned. The way we conducted the assessment was basically we just went back to the 18 projects and asked them a range of questions, about 15 questions. There was a clear template to cover things like, has the need itself of the project been affected by COVID? Is it basically called into question? And then how did COVID affect, or will it affect, their projected outputs, impacts, the delivery and their continued operation in terms of financial situation, governance, practical aspects of delivery. And then based on for each of these questions, we allocated sort of RAG status to identify the critical points and those where the impacts of COVID were expected to be more minor. Obviously, the detail of that is in the report. If I was to take you through each project, it would take us hours. So what I've done here is just give you some headline messages for the different types of projects by investment category, basically. So before I go into that, there's sort of three key messages across the whole portfolio to, I suppose, remember. The first one is that really the strategic value of those projects and the need for those projects is not called into question, by COVID-19. They're all aiming at supporting growth and, in this case, recovery as well. And so the need is very much there. In terms of implementation, most of the projects were completed already, so the implementation is not at risk, although one of the projects had some outstanding funding to defray, and because of delays, there could be a risk to that. Obviously, the main impact is on the project's operation and their ability to realize the benefits they initially expected, because these projects, like the whole economy, have been affected negatively by COVID, and some of them are at risk of not meeting their target outputs across the range of investment categories, really. So that's something for the LEP to bear in mind, where there might be a need to review the grant agreements. I'll come to that later. So the first category of projects is the training and education projects. There's a few of those. Key messages here are that really across the board, of course, they've all been negatively affected in the short term by demand for training and apprenticeships, especially as, of course, some apprentices were furloughed or made redundant, but also because a lot of the teaching involves, practical experience that has to be done on site. So the demand side was affected, and the supply side was affected by social distancing measures, which limited the ability and the capacity of training providers to welcome the number of students they would normally deal with. In the long term, however, all the projects really target either priority sectors, priority skills like STEM skills, high value skills, and so the demand in that sense is expected to bounce back. And there could also be some actually opportunity for increased demand in some categories as people who are made redundant as a result of COVID seek to retrain. Demand for training is often counter-cyclical, so in that sense, the strategic need for the projects remain. They have all, of course, experienced disrupted delivery, but to varying degrees, really depended on how well they were able to transfer some of the teaching online. And again, those that require hands-on experience, for those that was a little bit more difficult. Regardless, all of them expressed really significant, uncertainty, obviously, about enrollment for this year. And I think the view was that would depend on the types of students. Like there could be, like I said, some increases in some categories, but apprenticeships in particular were expected to suffer very badly, especially as businesses have to adapt to new circumstances, maybe reprioritize their spending, and some of them obviously may close as well. So for that reason, a few of them expect difficulties in meeting their targets. In terms of financial risks and so on, like I said, that all those projects were completed, LEP funding was spent, so there's not really a risk with that, the risk is more for the ongoing operation of the various organizations, because the drop in obviously students and apprenticeships will affect their financial status. So that was identified as a risk for the source of revenue. Those are the key messages for these categories. Should I stop you if there's any questions, or should I move on to the next categories?
Please move on, Stephanie.
Okay, good. So transport infrastructure projects. So whether obviously again during lockdown, public transport and road transport both sort of almost ground to a stop for a while. And obviously things starting to pick up, especially with road traffic a couple of months later, but there's still uncertainty about what the shape of that recovery in terms of transport use is going to look like in terms of modal splits and levels of uses. So it's more about the sort of timing of recovery. The strategic case of the schemes again remains very high. Public transport is a very long-term infrastructure which supports important objectives, environmental objectives, regeneration objectives, and road investment. The road schemes identified and funded were, addressing well-known issues of congestions and access on very important parts of the area. So that also remains very much relevant. So the view in terms of the value for many of these schemes is that undoubtedly there will be, a dip in the benefits of the schemes for probably at least a couple of years. But those projects are, they have a life of 60 years, 50 years. So over the lifetime of these assets, the value for money is unlikely to be questioned. And then there was one point that was raised a few times in terms of the potential risks. It's more to do again with, I suppose, operation and long-term maintenance of the assets, where local authorities obviously already had constrained resources, and as a result of COVID, they had to divert a lot of those resources. There was heavy demand on these resources for support, like children care, adult social care, and yet their sources of revenues, which was largely based on parking revenues, business rates, obviously were really decimated for a while. So there are financial risks there to I suppose continue the maintenance of those assets. That was transport. Research and innovation, that's really the Center for Cancer Immunology. So completely different kind of projects, of course. The strategic need for that is really, not sort of, unfortunately, I guess in question, this is not an area of work that is not needed anymore, and is very much in line with NHS targets. I think the worry there, or the impact there, was about creating delays in diagnosis and trials. So these will, get back on the road, so to speak, but there will be a delay. However, despite that, the centre stated they don't foresee an impact on jobs. All staff have been retained during COVID, PhD students also. So despite more limited activity for trials and sort of collaborations with business over the lifetime of the project, the value for money won't really be affected too badly. Here again, the main risk associated with COVID is about the financial health and sort of sustainability of the organization, because they expect fully that charitable donations in particular will drop, and those are necessary in particular for their PhD students. And then there's the wider risk to Southampton University's finances. So in that sense, there's a sort of underlying message there across the different types of projects. Is the financial health that's been affected most. Development projects. Sorry, this slide is a bit wordy, but the two development projects actually had quite different profile and experience. So I had to split the analysis between the two slightly. They, of course, both were affected by how the housing and commercial markets sort of stopped during lockdown, and also delays in construction activities. And they're now facing some level of uncertainty about the recovery of the market, not just in levels, I think, but also in the types of requirements. What will people and businesses be looking for as, accommodation? So there's actually quite important questions for them there. But the need for these development projects, again, they're an important assets to regenerate and attract businesses in Solent and address housing needs. So the need is very much there, but the crisis has impacted them in terms of delays to delivery, lower sales price, and reduced demand, increased costs, and then that pressure or that need to consider whether the actual type of demand will change in the market. So more specifically at Centenary Quay, I think there were delays in finalizing the tower because construction had to be paused because of lockdown, and then that has a sort of snowball impact on other things like securing consents and just managing the project generally, and also because of COVID there could be supply chain issues. There'll be a backlog essentially, and all of that usually turns into cost increases. So that project definitely identified a number of risks to being able to meet the LEP targets in the original time frame. I mean, actually they expect at least 6 to 12 months delay, so it's not going to happen. And because of that, the last portion of LEP funding they still had to spend may also not be spent on time. At Downsbury Hill Farm, the picture is a bit different in that the scheme was really a link road to a development site. So the full benefits of the scheme are about that site being developed. So again, the full impacts will depend on the shape and recovery of the market. There's mitigation measures in place. There's some, the proactive approach to discussing new leases and those types of arrangement that may make it more attractive to tenants. But there will also be delays to realizing the full impact. So the outputs in terms of jobs probably won't be realized in the original time frame agreed with the LEP. And I think this is the last category. So business growth support projects, again, sort of two different pictures here. So I had to present it separately. We've got the Solent Growth Hub on the one side, which actually is one of the few areas of services that is more needed now than ever. So during lockdown and the following months, they actually experienced a very, very sharp rise in inquiries and demand for their services. And the delivery, importantly, was not really affected because the service itself is provided largely remotely. So very positive in that sense, and the strategic importance of the service, of course, is more important than ever. So the outputs of the projects are actually most likely to exceed what was initially expected, and the economic case for this service would be strengthened. The other side of the other type of business support project that was funded is the Ferrum Innovation Center, and that's a very different experience because this provides support on site. So the site had to close during lockdown, and which means they couldn't basically provide the services. And there's some uncertainty here about how the longer term impact of COVID will translate into the need for services if businesses are forced to close down. However, they did say they also experience inquiries from businesses looking to downsize, and the fact that they offer quite flexible accommodation services is very appealing. So in these kinds of uncertain economic situation, that could be actually very appealing to a range of businesses. Despite that, I think that they expect their actual outputs to, at this point, not meet the targets. And the other risk here, as with many of the other projects I've mentioned before, is about the financial stability of the scheme, because it will fully depend on their ability to retain and attract tenants, but also on the level of rents they will be able to charge in sort of this new economic climate. I think that's it. The report concluded with just a few suggestions for how to handle, monitor the situation going forward. Obviously, this is a few months old already, but hopefully they're still, relevant. And it's a combination of obviously close monitoring and having in place a system of early alerts where the schemes warn the let very early on if there's real serious challenges and problems in meeting their committed outputs. There's also value in monitoring, given what I said about the financial risks for a lot of organizations. There's value in monitoring quite closely the financial position of the parent organizations for the projects. That should mitigate that risk, or at least allow the LEP to react early if there are problems. And then the other side is, of course, how to deal with the fact that a lot or several of those projects won't be able to meet the outputs in the time frame initially agreed. So the LEP might want to hold, and I think you might probably done that already, but discussions with the schemes about how to adapt the grant agreement if it's justified, to reflect the COVID-19 impact. And in the more extreme cases, there may be a need to consider whether there's a case for recovering some of the grant that was paid. That is the end of this section. Before I jump into the impact assessment report, are there any questions for us?
Members, any questions for Stephanie, please? Carry on, Stephanie.
All right, excellent. So this is very quick. This is a couple of slides, really. As Steve said, we in January we're commissioned by the LEP to look at these same 18 projects, local growth fund projects, to get a sense of how they were doing, how delivery went in terms of timescales and budget, what outputs were produced and outcomes were expected, and assess, really get a sense of the benefits that these projects delivered for the Solent area, and also, if relevant, identify any challenges. So the analysis was undertaken largely between February and April. Again, I mentioned that just because so you can get a sense of some of it is a little bit dated in a sense. So some of the outputs will have been affected by COVID, but also some others will have materialized that were not captured then. So the first final report, we can say, that was provided for review in June 2020, and then we presented that to yourselves on the 24th. What we're doing now is we got some additional data on the Solent Growth Hub, and as we said, obviously that's a very important service. It's important to include it in that report. So we're going to add that in, just a couple of final comments. So that will be the essentially technical report completed. But then the main task is to produce, a short, user-friendly, with lots of visuals, report that can be used for communication, really, with a range of stakeholders. So we've got, those are the two things we're doing at the moment. Where we are is the content for the external reports being submitted for review, and it very much focuses on, key, like, strong messages and achievements of the local growth fund. I'll go through those quickly after. And our graphic designer is, like, essentially producing a desktop published report that looks good, basically, with infographics and maps and all of that for early December. There's two slides here. I just quickly run through the key, external messages we're trying to bring out. But again, bear in mind, I think the messages are important, but the report will have, case studies to make things like a bit more tangible, with graphics and maps. So we'll hopefully bring out those messages in a really, compelling way. So, oh, sorry, my mistake. There we go. So the key messages really, we start with pointing out how obviously those LGF projects support long-term objectives and align with the Solent 2050 strategy, but actually it's also worth, given the current circumstances, pointing out that that also supports the economic recovery plan for Solent. The 18 projects basically amount to about 90 million pounds of LEP funds, and they've unlocked a further 140 million just through match funding from public and private investment. The majority of the funding has been targeted at training and education and transport projects, which actually are the type of projects that benefit, very, very wide number of residents and businesses throughout the whole area. They're not sort of small niche projects. The total match funding, actually that point should have gone before the other one, amounts to about £1.6 for every £1 invested by the LEP. But that I want to point out here that that's an average across the portfolio. And because there are, for instance, a lot of training centres, these are not, don't necessarily leverage.
Frozen, Stephanie.
Yeah, same for me actually, Chair. I can't. Stephanie's no longer moving or speaking.
Shall I carry on, Steve?
I can tell you that there is one more slide to go, so hopefully she'll come back on stream soon.
Andy, run with it. That's a great idea if you can pick it up.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, what we're saying about the match funding is obviously, oops, that's an average. Hang on, let me get the slides.
Okay. Okay, Andrew?
Yeah, so I just, can anyone see any slides or are they all completely gone?
Yes, I can see the slides.
Okay. Let me show. Sorry. So are we back on the same slide that we were?
You're in the following one.
Right, okay. So just to summarise, to close off, so the match funding was, an average of 1.6 to each pound, but that did vary by project, basically, and then overall the outputs overall had been achieved bar the floating bridge, and most projects were delivered on budget, some with a small cost overrun. And then turning to the last slide, generally where there was a delay on projects, it was really a delay with the starting date, which meant once they got underway, they were still working to timetable. So it's not that projects necessarily were delayed, it's just they've got going so that, maybe a bit later. So about 60% were delivered on time, and or a delay of a month or two. So overall, there's strong progress on achieving targets across jobs, housing, trading floor space, and apprenticeships. Only one delivery of direct jobs is actually lagging. And then when we add all these together, of these at the moment, we haven't added in the hub benefits, but you're looking at something like £700 million worth of economic output over the next 10 years, which can be quantified. You have to add to that also that there are wider impacts in terms of what we'd call added value, which can be the perception of unlocking development, enabling transition to a low carbon economy, and making the economy more resilient by diversification, as well as supporting the Solent LEP's existing strengths in various areas. That they're difficult to quantify in a measurable way, but generally they're always there in a mix. And that was it.
Sorry, my connection just died for some reason. Apologies. Very annoying. Yeah, that's the end of the presentation. Really. Thanks, Andy.
Well, thank you, Stephanie and Andrew, for that. Members, do any of you have any questions at all?
Do you mind unsharing your screen, Andy, just so we can...
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, that's great.
Let me just...
Well, it appears there are no questions come to me. Stephanie and Andrew, thank you very much indeed for that update. Much appreciated.
Okay, will do.
Bye.
Thanks, Hugh.
Members, we move on to item 5, the governance update on the mid-year review. Has everybody got...
Thanks.
Sorry?
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Happy to pick up there. There we go. I can see you all again.
Okay, Rich, over to you.
Thank you very much. So this item is a shorter one on the agenda. It really is an update item for members, just so that you're cited on where we are in terms of our annual performance review process, which is an important, clearly an important process for us, reflecting on things that have been said already in this meeting. Stu mentioned the track record of delivery and the sort of government view of trusting us with investment in terms of securing future money. So an important area that government go through with us. So no slides for me on this one. Did send round a short update paper, which I will not read through, but just to kind of summarise where we are in that process. There's a requirement under the National Local Growth Assurance Framework for all LEPs to publish a delivery plan and an annual report on an annual basis. That delivery plan, I'll come on to the annual report in just a moment, just focus on the delivery plan first. That's a key document for us because effectively that sets out at the start of the year what it is the LEP is going to be focusing on, going to be prioritising, and that forms a key element of how we're assessed at year end by government. Importantly, no doubt that's a public document. We're required to publish that. So also by local stakeholders in the area, have we been able to do what we sort of set out to over the course of the year? So very, very important for us. The link to our current delivery plan for the current year is in the paperwork for the meeting. It's available on the website to look at the detail of that. In terms of where we are with the delivery recovery plan, we have undertaken internally a mid-year review of that plan, looking at all of the sort of strategic actions that we said that we would look at over the course of the 12 months, which I will come on to in a little bit more detail in just a moment. That forms part of our own sort of best practice in terms of reviewing where we are, and it's also a reference point for our discussion with government as part of their annual performance review. So they have introduced a mid-year review with government government colleagues as part of that process. It's not as formal as the year-end review, so we don't get a grading from the mid-year review. It is an update meeting that took place during last month, during October, and very positive feedback received from government in relation to that, and particular areas picked out was our work in relation to the economic recovery plan and also the Getting Building Fund, both of which you've had updates on today under the first agenda item. So very positive feedback and no specific actions that needed to be addressed as a priority before the annual performance review. That's not the entirety of the process, however. There's a range of other elements that will be undertaken as we lead into the annual performance review. The first is a desk-based assessment, essentially, by the compliance team at HM Government. Primarily that involves a review of our website and our published material to make sure we are ticking all the boxes that are required for us in terms of operating in an open and transparent way. Can they find out who's on the board? Have we published registers of interest? Can they find our assurance framework and key documents like that published? Those checks are underway at the moment, and we expect feedback by the end of this month on the compliance checks there. So no doubt we will be able to pick up anything if there is any helpful feedback provided. There's clearly nothing we're aware of that we're not publishing that we should, or that we're not making available that we should, but that sort of additional review is always very, very helpful for us, and that will then inform the annual performance meeting, which is a formal process. It's attended by our chief exec and also our board directors as well. So our chair, who's on the call now, will be no doubt looking forward to that meeting with government to be assessed. It typically happens January, February time, so start of next year. And at that meeting, they will look at 3 categories of performance: delivery, strategy, and governance. And the way that works, they will effectively give us a grade through that process. In relation to delivery and governance, there's sort of grades that range from requires improvement through to good and exceptional. Really, you want to be in the good and exceptional end of that. There are implications if you are identified that requires improvement in any of those areas, including a more substantial deep dive from government and agreement of a plan of action with them as to how those issues will be rectified. We've never been in a requires improvement phase at any of our annual reviews to date, it's worth noting, but really it's a really important point for us. We don't rest on our laurels. We are committed to continuous improvement, so still committed to that. From a strategy perspective, they don't grade things in quite the same way. It's either a have you met the requirements or have you not? So a sort of yes, no, rather than a grading. I think it's fair to say we're expecting, based on the feedback from the mid-year review, us to receive a positive outcome for that approach, but it is looked at slightly differently there. So that meeting will take place at the end of the year that we're working towards at the moment. The final point, just to flag in terms of the sort of annual performance and annual assurance piece that we have is actually a role that's performed locally. And it, for those that were in attendance at the workshop that we held recently, where I did talk in detail about the role of the accountable body in these processes, this is where you start to see that play out. So as part of the annual performance review, our Section 151 officer at Portsmouth City Council, our accountable body, will be required to prepare an assurance statement, which effectively is setting out any concerns they have with the operation of the LEP, or indeed confirming that they do operate in accordance with the expected requirements of the national assurance framework. So we will be working with our accountable body for in relation to that, and part of that work is an annual review of our assurance framework. So that's our local assurance framework. It's important that we always ensure that we do keep that current. There hasn't been a new national assurance framework provided for the current year, so it's not we're not expecting wholesale changes or updates to that, but it is still very much part of our commitment to continue to review that annually. So we will do that, and that work is underway at the moment in terms of the assurance framework review. So that's kind of where we are in the overarching process, working towards year end. I will just pause for a moment on the delivery plan that I mentioned, because I do think that is an important point for colleagues to be aware of. And within the report, within the delivery plan, you'll see that structured against sort of the strategic areas of activity, and within each area there is a range of activities that we were expecting to take forward during the current year. And in the paper for the meeting, we've provided a sort of high level dashboard where we've sort of RAG rated our progress against each of those areas. And I think the performance overall, and recognising this is at mid-year point, so we wouldn't expect to have achieved everything at mid-year point. We would very much expect a range of items to still be underway at this stage, but performance has been strong, particularly in areas around strategy, around business support, and around utilising our sort of convening and coordinating powers. And that is reflective of some of the work that you've heard about today, bringing together the task force, economic recovery plan, redirecting resources towards business support, etc. So in a very good place, I think there. What it is worth flagging though is there are some areas which are marked as red on there, not a lot, just a handful, and some of those areas are areas where it indicates that we need to provide a bit more focus in the next half of the year as we move towards year end. And an example of that would be in relation to our aspirations to support businesses with high growth potential and looking at supporting those growth cases. That was a big aspiration for us at the start of the year, as it is in most years, to be fair, looking at those sort of growth projects. Clearly the focus of our business support in the year to date has been around more of the survival, economic resilience piece rather than the growth potential. But that is an area that we do need to revisit. And indeed the inquiry rates were picking up in relation to growth proposals from businesses that we had coming in prior to the announcement of this second wave of national restrictions that we find ourselves in now. So an area like that is one that we need to look at. It is worth noting that there are also areas within the delivery plan that it is unlikely that we will see future further progress on during the coming year, and for good reason as well. So to give an example there, we do a lot of work around inward investment and looking at international trade. So we did set out trade missions, for example, that we were looking at taking forward during the coming year, building on our work with Maritime UK and developing relationships with the US through the US-UK Global Trade Forum, as an example. Clearly, our international trade mission activity has been on hold with the international travel restrictions in place. Similarly, in areas such as exploration of a water taxi service around the Southampton waters area, that remains a aspiration for us. So I'm not saying it's not going to happen. For still very much a piece of work that we want to look at in the context of the decarbonisation and visitor economy activity that Stu has talked about on the economic recovery strategy. But the likelihood of us investing in that service for within year, considering where we are now, the social distancing restrictions, as well as the general experience and confidence in public transport that we're seeing at the same time, does mean it's unlikely that we will progress some areas like that within the short term. So that's just a few examples there where there is areas we won't take forward. The other element that we will pick up within that annual review and that conversation with government is clearly this year, probably more than ever, has been an extremely fast-paced, fast-moving year in terms of the activity that we've been involved in. So a whole host of the work that Brian and Stu and have talked about today we weren't even aware of at the start of this year when we published our delivery plan. So things like the loan fund, the kickstarting tourism fund, the Getting Building fund, which was announced later in the year as an opportunity. They're all big areas of work which you won't see featured in our delivery plan for the start of the year, but that we will still pick up as part of our sort of summary of performance when we work with government there. So that's a bit of a high level overview of where we are in the process, really for Growth Forum members to note at this point, and clearly we will pick up the comments today in relation to governance and bring back a more detailed item for the next meeting where we can look at some of the audit activity, etc. that Philip's flagged. We will do that on the forward plan. The final point I wanted to mention before handing back, Chair, is in relation to the annual report for 2020. So that's the other key document I mentioned at the start, which will set out the activity. It's the backwards-looking document. The delivery plan is clearly the forward-looking document. The annual report reports on what we have done. So that will be due for publication in 2021. Got to publish it by April, 1st of April at the latest. And we are starting our work to think about that annual report now. And obviously, the content will be very different and reflective of what we've been doing over the recent year, but structurally and the sort of type of information that we'll include, we are looking at the annual report from 2019 as a template for that. I just wanted to flag that there's a link to our 2019 annual report within the paperwork for the meeting. I think as we're developing that, we would very much welcome any feedback from the Solent Growth Forum, collectively or from individual members post the meeting. Very happy to pick up comments via email. Just to get a sense, is there information that you would expect to see included in that annual report that perhaps wasn't in the 2019 annual version? Is there any sort of key information you think we need to be drawing out or indeed publishing that you would have gone to our annual report expecting to see, but you didn't in the 2019 version? So any feedback would be very helpful in our development of that, because we will build that into the work we're doing ahead of preparing a report for the board to consider. yeah, thank you. Happy to take that via email post the meeting, or indeed any immediate reflections. But I'll pause there, Chair, and hand back. Happy to take any questions or comments if there are any.
Thank you, Richard. Members, do you have any questions? Alexis, you're muted.
Yes, I just wanted to check something. You're talking about the water taxes. Is this the water taxi from the waterside development up Southampton Water and across to Hamble?
Stu, do you want to come in on this one
sure.
at this point?
Yeah, no, it's not that. No. So this is essentially, we're all aware there's significant congestion on our highway network, and yet we have this largely unutilized resource, the Solent, Southampton Water, Portsmouth Harbour, for moving people about. Obviously, it's used by Hythe Ferry, Gosport Ferry, the Warsash to Hamble sort of ferry that you mentioned as well. But I think there's a recognition that there could be a further opportunity to move people around, particularly with some of the coastal communities that are growing up. So Forley Waterside will have about 1,500 houses there. We've already got places in Southampton, Ocean Village. I know the Harbour Hotel in Ocean Village are interested in that as well. So we're just exploring the opportunity, really, because we kind of got to the limit, so we can't just build any more roads, really. There isn't the space, and it's probably not the right thing to do. So it's really a kind of exploratory exercise to see if there is appetite. I think one of the challenges with using the sea is that it can be temperamental, of course, and it can be costly as well. And it's about changing habits, and the kind of landside transport infrastructure, buses, cycling, all needs to feed into those hubs where you would then pick up a ferry. So it's a big change, and not just a case of sort of putting water taxis on in operation, and would probably need to be pump primed in the first instance as well, I would imagine, by public sector, because I don't see it as being sort of profit making until those attitudes change. But absolutely has worked in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in countless examples in the States as well. And often a lot of those have started with private sector specific businesses trying to get their employees to work as well. So yeah, just food for thought for us, really. That's the kind of work we did do pre-COVID.
Thank you, Stuart. You happy with that, Alexis?
Yes, well, I'm clearly keen to push that up the agenda for the waterside. We have a lot of problems on the A326, which you've already contributed some money to. And now you want to push us off the road so that bicycles can take up our space. So if we can make travel to work a little bit more interesting with, the Southampton Water making best use of that, I think we should push that forward.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Alexis. Anybody else got any questions at all for Richard? Okay, members. The last item is AOB, any other business. And Philip mentioned at the start of the meeting that we are basically a standards and governance, and we would like more information so we can, whether it's the accounts or one thing or another. Do members have any thoughts on this at all, please? Yes, Tony.
I'd support Philip on what he was saying earlier about this, because I don't think we get enough information, and we certainly need that information to do our job properly, in my book. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments there, Tony. Noted. Any other comments at all? So we're looking for more information. Sorry, Daniel, you're going to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is more probably less about scrutiny and more about trying to help more than anything. But I can't remember when we talked about this previously. But going back to the point about getting the information out there to the people that need it, one of the things, obviously, we can't talk to as many people physically as we want to right now, both as politicians on the day job and also on the campaigning job. But obviously, social media is very key about how we promote what's going on. And if I don't know whether the LEP has or is thinking about having like a little WhatsApp group when it posts messages out, because what's really important to be able to do to promote these messages out as quickly as possible. And of course, you have got email, but you've got to read through all of it. So I don't know, it's more a question about how can we help you promote the positive stuff in this period to the people that need it. But of course, we need to know when it's coming out as well in order to do that. So it's more a question of how we might address that, Chair, than it is probably more than the scrutiny function. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Daniel.
I think if I could just sort of on that point, Daniel, I think that's really helpful and very welcome as an offer of support as well. And I think there's something for us to reflect on there. In we do send information out through our panels for sort of dissemination to local networks that they have. It's probably not something that we've done with members of the Solent Growth Forum, to be honest, and it's probably something that we should do. So we're very, very happy to pick that up, I think, moving forward.
Okay, now Lauren and I were talking before the meeting, sort of discussing the forward plan and skills advisory plan, etc. And we're looking our next meeting sometime February, March. Hopefully we may all be in person, otherwise we're back to our little sort of 4x2 screen with the smiling faces. I just wonder whether you had any comments there, Lauren.
No, I mean, I think we'll take on board the feedback in terms of getting internal audit, hopefully into the next one. I mean, I'd be interested if there's any reflections on what we've talked about today, sort of as opposed to questions. Appreciate it. It's a 2-hour, sort of bombardment of information. And perhaps we're not yet getting down to the scrutiny elements. But I guess that starts with the reflections. I mean, we've got 2 minutes left now, so it's possibly the wrong time. But I think just something to bear in mind, from my perspective, sort of going forward, is that whilst we, are doing most of the talking and giving you the information, it'd be very important to sort of have those thoughts from you guys as we're going through.
Okay, noted for that, Lauren. Noted. Anybody else got anything to say at all? Well, members, thank you very much indeed for all your time today. I make it 13:28, so we've done well. You're scheduled for 13:30. We'll improve next time. Thank you very much indeed for all your help.
Thanks so much, guys.
Sorry, Brian.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Bye for now.
Bye.